All right, back again with another video, second of the day. I really wanted to talk about those other issues that I talked about earlier, but I really want to talk about the reparations bill that Governor Gavin Newsom of California just signed. Um, it's not what you think it is, first of all, but let's get into it. Welcome to Marxisms. If you're just coming back here for more, welcome back. If you've never been here before, welcome. Please like and subscribe, and please feel free to share. Always happy to share. Please feel free to comment. I answer most of the comments. Some people like to just, leave a string of comments, which is fine. I'm all for it. Go for it. Whatever. I'll answer some of them. I'm not going to answer all of them. Some of them are ridiculous, but I'm happy to discuss the issues with you. Anyway, um, here's the thing. First of all, it doesn't pay anybody any money. It sets up. They did a bill a couple years ago where they set up a commission to study the issue, and this one just kind of does more of the same. It establishes a committee to decide, do some genealogy, and decide who might actually be eligible for this, for slave reparations and stuff like that. A couple years ago, they had a bill that I think was better than this one on the subject, but I'm going to get into that. And there's uh, a lot of talk. I've been seeing some stuff on social media where people are talking about their Irish ancestors, and I should get reparations because I had Irish ancestors or German ancestors or Italian ancestors, or even somebody said, "What about my Mormon ancestors?" Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that and why that's ridiculous. First of all, um, we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about the difference between chattel slavery, and if you don't know what chattel slavery is where you are either taken from another country and you're brought here against your will and put into bondage. You're owned for life unless your um, benefactor decides to give you freedom, which very rarely happened. Even in cases like Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition, he was very good friends with his slave, and his slave had hoped that, being a friend, that after the expedition that he would set him free, but he did not. So yeah, good friends they were. No, he wanted to keep him as a slave. He treated him fairly well, but he still kept him in bondage. So there, so very rarely did they get set free. Sometimes they did, but very rarely. Um, the difference between chattel slavery and what you Irish people are talking about, which is indentured slavery. Okay, indentured slavery was something that existed in this country mostly before the Revolutionary War. After the Revolutionary War, it went out of fashion. But it technically existed until the late 18th century. Okay, but what it was people wanted to come here from Europe and they had no way to get here. They didn't have the money. So they would go sign a contract saying that they would do, usually it was 4 to 7 years of work, labor. And here's the deal. The person would pay their way to America. They would have to serve and do labor for them for 4 or 7 years. In exchange, they would get free room and board. Okay, and then they would be set free after the contract was up. So first of all, they entered into the contract of their own fruition. They decided that, okay, I want to go into and work hard and do whatever this person says for 4 to 7 years so that I can get to America. That's going to pay my way. So I'm going to work off that debt. So they've been paid already previously by getting passage here. Um, and and then and then a contract that they signed into, all right? And then they would have to work and do what this master of theirs said for 7 years or 4 years or whatever it happened to be, whatever the terms of the contract were, and they would get fed and clothed and, given, a roof over their head, and then they would be set free at the end of it. Um, the same people make arguments about things. They make arguments about the same very same people that would make this argument, that have made this argument, are people that would make the argument that, okay, you have to pay your student loan debt because you signed a contract, even though they were predatory loans. They would say, well, you were old enough, you were 18, you signed the contract, so you have to pay it. Okay, so these same people are wanting reparations for their Irish ancestor who signed a contract and came over here and then was eventually set free. And um, so it's like you could make. It's funny they'll make a big deal about, well, you signed a contract, so you have to abide by it. But then now they're saying, oh, I deserve reparations because my ancestor signed a contract. Well, bullshit. It doesn't work that way. You can't have it both ways. First of all, second of all, the very same people that always say, "Oh yeah, my Irish ancestors, they were treated worse." I've had people say this. They were treated worse than blacks. The Irish were. Really? Yeah, no, that's not even close to being true. Because first of all, like I said, indentured servitude pretty much went out of fashion or style or whatever in the Americas after the Revolution. It didn't happen very often. It still did on some occasions up until like the 18th century, and I think technically it's actually still legal. But the problem was is there was nobody was willing to do it. Europe became a better place, first of all, so not as many people wanted to leave, and they were able to, and also they were able to work and make enough money to buy passage over here, and then they would be just free and clear. So that didn't happen. Plus, no one was willing to do it because we had chattel slavery. We had black people that were brought over here or bred here after certain laws were established to work for life, and you owned that person. So a white Southern racist slave owner, white supremacists, they owned people of African descent, and they bred them like animals. They treated them like animals. They housed them and clothed them like animals, and they worked them like animals. They were property. So there was no great need for indentured servitude. So there wasn't very many of you Irish who got um, um, are the descendant of indentured servants. There's very few of you out there, and the ones that are, I need to remind you that your ancestor signed a contract, just like the people who uh, signed those contracts to get government loans for education. So you're saying they should pay that off? Guess what? You don't deserve reparation. Sorry, you're shit out of luck. Um, so but these very same people that say that and who say that, oh, they were treated just as bad and all this stuff, are also the same people who deny the fact that America has always been a very racist country. And I actually had somebody who used to be a friend of mine argue with me that um, the Irish, there's that America is not a racist country, and the Irish were treated worse than blacks when it came to slavery, which is not true. And so I'm like, wait a minute. So we're not a racist country, but then now you're saying that your Irish ancestor, because he was Catholic, because he was Irish Catholic, because the Italians went through the same thing. The Germans actually went through the same thing too, not because necessarily because they were Catholic. Some of them were, but because they spoke different language, they were prejudiced. That people were prejudiced against them. Yeah, they were. Is absolutely true. The Irish were treated like crap. The Chinese were treated like crap. Um, they they made them work the railroad for little pay, and they were in the mining industry for little pay. I know my Irish ancestors were miners, And I'm not crying over reparations, by the way. Um, yeah, they were treated poorly because America is a racist country and always has been. There's a tradition of racism in this country. And to say on the one hand that there's not, and then to say, well, my Irish relatives were treated poorly, it's like, which is it? Again, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. The truth is, yes, the Irish were treated poorly, but at the end of the day, they were still white. So within a generation, and those people that came and had to suffer the servitude that they signed up for, a generation later, they were still white, and they were treated the same as anybody else. I always say my Irish ancestors, but my Irish ancestors were not directly involved in any of this stuff, but just about everybody was somewhat involved in this stuff. So in San Francisco, which is a predominantly Irish, Italian, and German city, um, they the three of those people, it was actually once a heavily Mormon city too, by the way, but they were recalled to Utah. Um, so they became they worked hard on the railroads and this and that, and then they settled in San Francisco and worked in the mines in Nevada and whatnot. That's what my relatives did, worked in the mines in Nevada. And then they settled in San Francisco. And then what did they do a few generations later? They took property from black people. They would use eminent domain because now the Irish and the Italians ran the city. Okay, all the police and fire were Irish, and a lot of the politicians were Irish and Italian, and there was probably some Germans involved in that as well because there was a large German immigration immigrants that settled there as well, and so they used eminent domain to take land from black people. And they redlined neighborhoods so that and segregated black people out of the neighborhoods. They created a situation where there was um, um, generational poverty amongst black people while they reaped the benefits of it. Everybody knows the Fillmore. Most people do anyway. If you know anything about music, you know the Fillmore theater and all that stuff. Well, that neighborhood was a predominantly black neighborhood, but it was a desirable place to live. And so the white Irish and Italians, they condemned the buildings there, and they shipped the black people off to Hunters Point and Sunnydale, which are the projects in southern San Francisco, the south part of San Francisco, where it's foggy, windy, and shitty, where Candlestick Park used to be. Um, that's what they the Sunnydale's right across the street from the Cow Palace. These were shitty industrial neighborhoods with where all the industry and pollution. I mean, Richmond was the same way. The black people lived in right next to the oil refinery, the Chevron oil refinery, while the rich people, white people, lived up on the hill. Um, but what happened in San Francisco is the Irish and the Italians came in when they were running the city after suffering racism. And then what do? They do the same damn thing, and they shipped the black people off to these shitty neighborhoods, segregated them, wouldn't let them in their schools, got them. They were in worse schools, shitty education. Now they don't have the properties that they used to have because they were ended up condemned, and the government would give them pennies on the dollar. Then some white Italian or Irishman would buy the land for dirt cheap and become rich. Bruce Beach in the Los Angeles area. That's exactly what happened. It was condemned by eminent domain, and white people took over. I guess the city did. It became a very exclusive, upper class, um, a resort type of place. Well, it was finally given back to the Bruce family, and it's worth millions today. But generations of poverty took place as a result of them getting their land stripped away. This is the kind of thing that we're talking. This is the thing that people don't know. People go, "Oh, slavery was 150 years ago. Nobody has to suffer that today, and none of the people alive had to suffer it." No, but they've had to suffer the repercussions of of slavery, of not having anything, a lot of these black slaves, they went out and they built themselves a future only to have it stolen from them by white people. And then and that's how institutional or that's how that institutional racism has created generational poverty among black people. So I think reparations, and they had a bill it's got shot down in California on this, that reparations should be given to the people who lost properties due to eminent domain back in the 60s and 50s and all the way back because they didn't have the ability to pass those lands and properties on to the next generation where it may not have been worth a lot of money then, but then a couple generations down the road, now it's worth a fortune. I mean, imagine owning a place in the Fillmore today. You know how much that'd be worth in San Francisco? A lot of money. But those people had it stripped away, and they got shipped off to live in a project. And if you don't know what a project looks like, look up Sunnydale in San Francisco because that's where most of them were shipped. They're just these huge, tall apartment buildings where people are crammed into 1-2 bedroom apartments that in just the shittiest neighborhood with industrial plants and a concert hall across the street. The Cow Palace, I mean, it was a great place. It was a great venue, but constant traffic, constant loud music from the concerts, gun shows, and this and that. You know, I used to go to the boat show there, and I've been to many concerts there. But the neighborhood is just blighted. You know, you, and it's because of these so-called Irish who should get reparations in the eyes of other white racists. Basically, you're a white racist if you believe that. If you believe that nonsense, then you're what I call soft racists, which means you're a racist. It means that you're not maybe openly racist towards people. You're like, oh, I have a black friend at work. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. Well, I have a black friend at work. I'm really friendly with him. It's like, yeah, you ever go golfing with him? You ever have a beer with him? Well, no. It's like, then he's not your friend. He's somebody you're acquainted with. And yeah, you treat him decently because you have to, pretty much, but you're not going to invite him to your barbecue with your neighbors. I mean, I do. I mean, doesn't make any difference to me. I mean, I go golfing with black friends and more than one, as a matter of fact, and have beers with them. I don't care. It doesn't matter because skin color makes no difference. I know some very fine people that are black or Mexican or whatever. I mean, hell, I moved to the Southwest knowing that it's a very Mexican culture down here. Why? Because I love Mexican culture. I like Mexican people. I don't have any problem with them. I've had many, many friends who are. It's just the whole thing is just silly. But this absolute freaking nonsense that your Irish relatives suffered so much because they were slaves. They were not slaves. They were indentured servants. They signed a contract. Now, chattel slavery, on the other hand, these people were brought over here, and I know I'm gonna hear it from the people, but black people sold them into slavery. So fucking what? It doesn't change how in the early times, yes, they were selling them to like the Portuguese and stuff like that. Other tribes, they would conquer a tribe, and because that's what slavery used to be. You conquered another nation or a tribe or whatever, and you enslaved their warriors. It was just I don't agree with that either, but it's different than chattel slavery. Um, so they go over, they buy them, they ship them across the ocean, and they'd pack them in. They'd pack them into these boats. There's movies about this, and a lot of them would die, but they didn't care because they were they were just property, and then they'd sell them. They'd sell them at slave markets, like an auction, like auctioning off antiques or something, and people would buy them, and then they would own them for the rest of their life. And then you had to do everything they said. And if you didn't do it, they'd whip you. If you tried to run away, they'd hobble you and whip you. And they kept them in detestable condition. They didn't care about their health. This nonsense that Trump is putting out there that, oh, they had a roof over their heads and they were given food and medical care. They were given minimal of all of that stuff. and they were treated like shit in the process, and they were owned. They weren't free. They couldn't come and go as they pleased. They couldn't marry who they pleased. If they had children, the children were sold off. Oftentimes their wives were sold off. Families were separated. It's not the same thing as that did not happen to the Irish. It did not happen to the Germans. It didn't happen to the Italians, and it sure as hell didn't happen to the Mormons. The Mormons weren't treated real well. Yeah, it's true. But that was a short period of time, and guess what? Ultimately, they're white. Especially then, because they didn't allow black people or minorities of any kind into the Mormon religion. They do now, but back then they didn't. So once again, they were still treated differently because they were Mormon, but they had their own state, for God's sakes. So they had their own governments, and they did really well. And they didn't suffer like generation and generation of black people. The things that black people had to go through once slavery was over, they weren't allowed to vote. They had to when they tried to pass laws to saying they could, they were given tests or fees to vote, which they couldn't pay, or they were asked for IDs to vote, and they couldn't provide them because they didn't have any birth certificates. So they still suffered all those things. So they didn't have all the rights that humans had, or that white people had. They were not treated as human. They had to drink in separate water fountains. They had to drink in or go to the bathroom in separate bathrooms. They couldn't go to white stores. They had to sit in the back of the bus. There was just so many restrictions on them. They couldn't live in certain neighborhoods because of redlining. And if you don't know what redlining is, it happened in every state, I think, except for Hawaii. Because what they would do is they would draw out neighborhoods, and the best areas up on the hill where it's really nice, where you have a nice view, that's where the white people got to live. The black people got to live down by the wharf and the industry and the oil fields and south of the railroad tracks and things like that. That's where black people had to live. They had to live in ghettos. They had to live in projects. They weren't allowed in the good schools. They were segregated from school. White kids did not go with black kids to school. Wasn't allowed. You couldn't, if you were black, you could not date a white woman. There were laws that you couldn't marry. If you were black or white, you couldn't marry a black person, vice versa. You couldn't sell your home to a black person. If you wanted to sell your home in a certain neighborhood, there were clauses in there. I had my first home that I bought was built in 1960 in Santa Rosa, California, and it had a clause in there that it couldn't be sold to an Oriental. And I think there was probably something about African Americans in there as well and I'm like, what's this? And they go, that's all crossed out. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still in here. And it's like they keep the language in, but they just put a line through it because, laws, obviously that's against the law today. Thank God. So they weren't allowed to create wealth. Tucson, Arizona, or no, Tulsa, Oklahoma. We never learned this story in school. We learned it just a few years ago because of a movie that came out, a documentary, and I was stunned. It's like, why did I not hear this in history class? Because they don't teach you real history. That's why critical race theory is important, because critical race theory is the history of the United States from a perspective of racism, and it shows how black people were systematically kept out of good homes, good mortgages, good neighborhoods, all that stuff, and how they were kept in generational poverty, and how they weren't able to pass on nice properties like the Fillmore or Bruce Beach because they were taken from them. So they deserve reparations, not just people who were held slave, but if you're black, you probably grew up even today, you grew up in a bad neighborhood because of generational poverty. And black people know this. There's a few that just that like to toe the MAGA line and it's like, oh no, I've had every opportunity. It's like, that's bullshit. Some people have had better opportunity. It's true. But the majority have not. They've not been able to acquire that wealth. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you don't know the story, um, a white girl complained that a black guy touched her, and they lynched the entire black community of that town and burned it to the ground. Yeah, there was one section of town that was entirely black because it was redlined into, and it was considered the black Wall Street because it was very well to do, they were very well to do. They actually were able to build a nice community and build nice homes and businesses and stuff like that. And all the white people burned it all to the ground. They would fly airplanes over and drop gas bombs on in the neighborhood. They literally killed over 300 people and burned it to the ground because of one incident where the woman tried to say that the black guy tried to rape him, but supposedly it really wasn't. That he just accidentally touched her in an elevator. That's all it took to trigger a bunch of white supremacist racists in Oklahoma to burn and kill an entire neighborhood of African Americans. It's just sick. So don't tell me that we haven't had a racist country. And this stuff has actually gone on, and that's why reparations are important. Um, they should be given something for the trouble that we put them through. And all you descendants of Italians and Irish, fuck you. You're so full of shit. There's no way that your family suffered like these people did. So quit your crying. It's just unbelievable the comments that when saw this on Facebook and I see the comments of people. What about down the line? What about my German relatives? Why don't I get reparations? What about my Mormon? We were Mormon and look how poorly we were treated. Oh, stop your whining. Unbelievable. Unfortunately, though, this is the thing they signed in California is not an actual reparations bill. No one's gonna pay anybody any money. They're just doing studies. It's probably gonna go nowhere, unfortunately, and the racism will continue. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, stop being ridiculous. Learn your history. Peace.